Hello, this is Hugh Carr. Thank you very much for joining us for the latest story from the Black Dog Chronicles. Please, if you haven't already done so, press the subscribe button and the notification bell so you never miss out on another story. Don't forget to tell your friends all about this channel so we can finally get up to 1,000 subscribers. Now, on with the new story. Stone by Peter Dickinson. Read by Hugh Carr. With his box on his back, Sly trudged into the village. A hog-hole he saw at once, a couple of dozen rubbishy little hovels round a church no better than a barn. Lucky to pick up a fourpence here. But a man must work his trade and take what he can get, or he'll lose his self-respect. And that's all that matters, isn't it? One of the hovels was trying to pretend to be an inn. That is to say, it had a branch of dead broom lashed to the doorpost. Sly went into the dark little room, put his box down where it could be noticed, bought himself a small mug of cider and a hunk of black bread, and waited for his customers to come in from the fields. They came. Without seeming to look at them, he reckoned them up. 4 bumpkins, 2 hicks, and a clod. They stared at the stranger, and even longer at his box, which was a 3-foot cube painted bright with stars and signs, and had air holes in the top. Occasionally, scratching noises came from inside it, and once a strange, mewing hiss. Sly had a trick of casting his voice. He sat, relaxed, no need to get into conversation. Start up a patter, one of them would ask in a moment. One of the hicks. Hicks always like to get their word in. "What have you got in the box, then?" "Cockatrice," said Sly, in a bored voice. "Cock what?" said the clod. "Never met a cockatrice," said Sly. "Well, of course you haven't, or you wouldn't be here, in this charming little village of yours. Instead, there'd be a fine stone statue of you in the place where you met the cockatrice." "Give us a look, then," said the clod, hog-eager. Sly sighed. "Don't you listen?" he asked. "You can't look at a cockatrice. If you'd look at him at the same moment he looks at you, and your eyes meet—" He snapped a bony finger and let the sound die in their ears. "You turn to stone," he whispered. "Gar," said the clod. "Cold hard stone, never to move again," said Sly. They thought about it. Sly sensed their slow minds grinding. He made the mewing noise come from the box. The hick, who had first spoken, stared at him, then quickly away. "What's your cockatrice look like, then?" he asked the air in front of him. Quite quick for a hick, thought Sly. "Well, he's mostly a sort of brassy colour," he said. "Silver stripes along his back. The front of him's a bantam cock as far as his legs, but all behind there his tail end's more a big lizard. You're fool enough to look at him once, you'll look at him twice." "You seen him, then?" said the hick, still to the air. "You could say so," said Sly. "Why you not turn to stone, then?" shouted the hick. The bumpkins and the other hick banged their table and yelled with triumph at the cleverness of their companion. Even the clod got it in the end. Sly smiled at the uproar and pulled from his belt purse a square of polished yellow metal, which he breathed on and rubbed on his sleeve. Then he twisted away and held the thing up so that they could see the men's reflection "You could say I'm seeing you, my friends," he said, "but I say I am not. All I am seeing is your image. That is how I know what a cockatrice looks like." They argued the point among themselves till the next thought struck them. "Give us a look, then," pleaded a bumpkin. "Give us a look in your bit of brass." And they came crowding round, hooked. Sly resisted. The cockatrice was not for show. He was taking it to the Emperor of Tartary, who needed it for the execution of criminals, since his religion did not allow him to shed blood. What would happen in the village, to the whole countryside, if it got loose? Why, he took his own life in his hands each time he opened the lid to feed the monster, and so on. 20 minutes later he was out in the road with the whole village, bumpkins, wenches, hags, clods, bazooms, hicks, the lot, crowding round, each eager to pay their farthing, to take their peep in the brass mirror. The mirror, it has to be said, was not very good. The metal was well polished, but there was a slight ripple on it, which made the reflection waver. Still, if you looked carefully, you certainly saw something moving in the depths of the box, with a front end like a bantam, and a back end not like any bird that ever was born. All the time the horrible mewing hiss came from the box, and Sly would listen and suddenly snatch the lid and cram it down and say that the creature was restless and might try to flap out, and then they would all be stone. That added to the excitement. Half of them had had their peep when Sly sensed a change, a hush at the edge of the crowd. He put the lid on the box and turned, smiling. The crowd parted respectfully, and he saw there was no need to worry. It was only a dotard leaning on the shoulder of a clodling, a dotard of dotards, snow-white beard, eyes deep under shaggy brows. The village priest, no doubt, but a dotard for all that. "What is happening?" he quavered. The whole crowd tried to tell him at once. He came dodderingly through, leaning on the clodling's shoulder. Sly started into his patter. The dotard listened, nodding and wheezing, and listened again with his head cocked to one side when the mewing noise came, sudden and loud from the box. He groped and found a farthing. The crowd whispered among themselves as Sly pushed the old fool into place and positioned the mirror. Sly inched the lid up. Suddenly, the dotard straightened from his crouch. He had both hands on the rim of the box. For all his age, he was stronger and quicker than Sly had guessed. He wrenched the box away and tipped it right over. "Don't look! Don't look!" yelled Sly. But already most of the village had seen an outraged bantam cock running across the mud road. Fastened over its tail feathers was a leather extension painted with scales. Sitting on a sun-baked rock, Sly stared back over the plain. Behind him, barefoot hills rose towards mountains. He brooded. There was one particular village in that plain, 3 days' journey away now, but here at this moment, in his thoughts, of course he'd been caught out before, jeered at and pelted before, had his takings seized back before. But for it to happen there, clods, bumpkins, hicks, and a dotard, if you'd lumped the contents of their skulls together, they wouldn't have added up to one brain. He could get another bantam, make another lizard tail. No need for a new box, as they'd thrust the old one over his head when they'd pushed him out of the village. But that jeering, there'd been a note in it. as though they thought it was Sly who was the clod. Something they knew and he didn't. Something about the doted. Well, one day Sly would come back and teach them a lesson. A man has to keep his self-respect. That's all that matters, isn't it? Just below where he sat, the sun's heat bounced back from a flat rock. Beyond that, the slope dropped away out of sight. He heard a sudden chirruping squeak. A small animal in terror. A mouse raced up onto the rock with a weasel looping behind it. Instead of pouncing at once, the weasel overtook the mouse, heading it off and driving it back, shrieking over the rock. Sly did not interfere. If the weasel chose to torment its prey before killing it, that was none of his business. In fact, it fitted his thoughts about Bumpkin Village to watch the game played out. But that did not happen. As the mouse came skittering back on a new line, it suddenly froze still. The weasel froze too. 6 inches in front of the mouse, the surface of the rock had moved, had risen, and become a large, squat lizard, the exact color of the rock. Sluggishly, on splayed legs, it waddled forward and ate the mouse in a single gulp. It raised its head towards the weasel, which arched its back and spat. Out of the lizard's spine rose a bright purple fin. The weasel's brown and white fur turned gray. It did not move again. It was stone. Still, with its tail towards Sly, the lizard lowered the fin and sank down onto the rock. So exactly did its color match the surface that it seemed to vanish. But with the stone weasel to guide him, Sly could just make out where it lay. He sat still, shaking with terror and thrill, and then nerving himself to move. When he did so, it was with a thief's caution. First he undid the hinge lacings on the box and laid the lid aside. Then he rose, and carrying the box bottom up, crept down the slope, step by slow step, not daring to dislodge one pebble. All the time, he watched the surface of the rock in front of the weasel. His neck muscles ached with tension, ready to jerk his head aside at the slightest movement. Only as he banged the box down did the lizard stir. And then it was too late. Sly weighted the box with a boulder and scrambled back for the lid. He slid it probingly under until he felt the lizard scramble against it. Firmly he slid the box towards him, forcing the lizard up onto the lid, until he had the box and lid fitted together. He put his hand under the lid, closed his eyes, and turned the box over, keeping the lid closed tight as he did so. With a sigh of relief, he heard the lizard flop first against the side, then down onto the bottom. He weighted the lid down and paused, trembling. The weasel caught his eye, and he picked it up. It seemed to have been carved from a dark stone, smooth and very heavy. It was perfect in every hair and claw. He fetched his pack and put it away. Now he realized that he would need to open the lid in order to replace the lacings. He hesitated. The lizard had made no sound. At last, with his tongue flicking over his lips, he got out his brass mirror and polished it on his sleeve. He knelt by the box and inched the lid up, holding the mirror at the proper angle to show him the bottom. It was dim down there, as it was meant to be, so that bumpkins should not see too clearly. He made out a dark shape on the wood of the bottom. It did not stir. He opened the lid further to let in some light. Now, the rippled image moved. The fin rose, large eyes open, gazing up. In the blurred depths of the brass, the two sight lines met. Sly's and the lizard's, even like that, even so faintly encountered. Sly felt the icy shaft of the creature's gaze lance into his brain, into his soul. The neck muscles knew what to do. They jerked the head aside, and he staggered back, letting the lid slap down. It took an hour for the sun to warm him through. He fastened the lacings by touch and made his way down the mountain. Next morning, he had a slice of luck. He met a merchant on the road and sold him the weasel for 5 silver coins, which meant that he'd have no need to earn his living as a mountebank for a good few days. The idea came to him that he might now be able to give up traveling and settle in a rich town, where he could make his living as a dealer in statues. Dogs, cats, squirrels, people? Why, yes. If he could find a busy orphanage and make a deal with its warden. But before any of that, there was the matter of Bumpkin Village. Deliberately, Sly waited till Sunday before he went back. Everybody was in the little mud church, the people on their knees, the dotard wheezing through the prayers. Sly waited in the porch for the last amen. He flung the door open, strode to the bottom of the aisle, and put his box down. "You wanted to see a real cockatrice?" he cried. "Well, I have bought you one." Perhaps there was something in his voice that told them that this time he did not lie. They stayed where they stood, all but the dotard, who came doddering down the aisle, leaning as always on his clodling's shoulder. "Well, well," he wheezed, "a cockatrice, a real one. I did not believe that such a thing could be. I would like to see that." Sly stood back and flung the lid up, keeping his head turned away. The priest came blundering up, so stupid eager that he let go of the clodling and almost blundered into the box. He put a trembling old hand on the edge. What if he turned it over as before? Sly tensed to dart away. He might lose his cockatrice, but he would have a church full of statues. Very striking some of them might be. And he would have his revenge. The dotard craned over the box. "My friend," he murmured, "I think your cockatrice is dead." Sly took a pace forward, raising his arm to strike the old man in his fury and disappointment. As he did so, he glanced down into the box. The purple fin was raised, the pale eyes staring upwards, meeting Sly's glance. The ghastly shaft searing through brain, soul, body, and he was stone. "Put the lid back," said the priest. "Do not look anyone. Be careful." They did as he said, among whispers and mutters of shock. They waited for his next order. He would know what to do. He had been a scholar, a dweller in cities, adviser to kings, who had come back in old age to the village and people of his birth. "Not a cockatrice, of course," he said. "There's no such animal. It is a fable. I think our unfortunate friend must have found a basilisk. But let us not grieve too much for him. He might have done greater harm if he'd been allowed. Now I have read that there is only one safe method for dealing with a basilisk. Does anyone possess a good mirror?" It happened that there was a woman who had just such a thing in her hut. Long ago she had been servant to a gentlewoman who had given the useless luxury to her as a wedding gift. She ran and brought it. They carried the box out into daylight. The priest made them all stand back while he opened the lid and then held the mirror flat over the box so that it reflected straight down. He tilted it slightly this way and that to make sure. Then he borrowed a crook from a shepherd and prodded around in the bottom of the box until he felt the tip scrape on stone. Satisfied, he turned the box over. A stone thing clattered out. "Why," said someone, "it's not like a cark at all. 'Tis more like a great lizard." "A dragon, you mean," said someone else. "Yes, that's what it is," said the hick who had first spoken to Sly in the inn. He always liked to get his word in. "'Tis a dragon," he said. "And look, why, you'd only need to put some kind of spear in this fellow's grip where he's got his arm up, and he'll do for St. Michael. Then we'll all have our holy statue like we've always wanted. St. Michael killing the dragon." "St. George, he was the one with the dragon," said someone else. The old priest smiled and nodded as they argued it out. They were good, simple people. Then he reached out and felt for the shoulder of the boy he needed to lead him everywhere, and told him to take him home for his dinner.